So just two quick administrative items. One of them quick anyway, before we get started. One is just the minutes from the last meeting. Christy sent those out to you. So those would be a draft unless there are any corrections, changes that need to be made. Now's the time to bring that up. Looks okay? Okay. All right. Thank you very much on that. The other is the tour. So we sent an email out about the tour, which is for July 13th, what we scheduled. And in the email, there was a tentative schedule starting at 7:30 a.m. at the middle school. And Kimo said he would be there for that. I think all the principals are available except Mina Shaloni at the Conniff. It's her vacation week, so she won't be there. But the other principals are. And we put together a schedule there that, frankly, is very tight. And so the question I pose to you as a group is whether you want to stay with this schedule. As I kind of laid out in that email, it seems to me there's three options. One is we try to stay close to this schedule, and that means moving along very quickly in each building and not asking a lot of questions, to be honest, because we have like 45 minutes between buildings, and that's transportation we got to. So that's pretty tight. Another option, just saying we're not going to probably even see the entire building, particularly the high school. There's no way we would be able to see the high school, and even to some degree the middle school. They could walk, but so we have to kind of look more selectively. Another option is to extend the time to more like 12:30 or thereabouts. So add a little bit of time to each building. And then the third alternative is to only visit 2 or 3 buildings and then set up another time for the other buildings. Thoughts? What's the pleasure?
I think you've got to have, if we're going to do it, we might as well do it right. Let's take the necessary time, whatever it takes. So, I think it sounded like a tight time schedule. We took an hour and a half in one building, and I feel like I could have done that in every building easily. I don't think we raced through the buildings either. We weren't going quickly. It was just 2 of us.
Well, I think also then the question is kind of what's the purpose of this tour? And it's really, I suspect you spend an hour and a half in the Conniff, right?
Right.
And that's the smallest building.
Right.
So, but you were probably, looking at exploring all the spaces and everything else. We wouldn't have time to do that, for sure. For sure. I mean, that would take a full day to do all the buildings at that level. So I think this is really more of kind of an introduction to the space.
She's never seen it before.
Correct.
It's not like a-
Exactly.
And kind of what's the general space look like? We're not going to look in every room.
I think it's more for like massing, to get a sense of the scale of the building, condition. I don't think it's necessarily to look in every room, under every, hood.
Right.
It's more just to get an understand.
I think
to look at.
that's a key point, to look at the problem areas. Like when we were in the Conniff, we were seeing the classroom that's divided into 4 sections where there was a couple of, where there are, small reading groups or whatever. I think it's useful to see those sorts of spaces that might be a challenge or might be really useful to see. And we talked about at the middle school, certain rooms being, Kimo, you were saying one of the gyms was good for dodgeball, but not so swift for a lot of other, things. And I think it's good to be able to see those areas.
And like other people talk about how Hosmer is a long distance to trek.
Right.
Just kind of getting that experience. But yeah, like a general feeling for the buildings. I personally would prefer that we spent more time on one day than trying to organize the second day, because I have to call in favors for my small children. So.
We can do that. I mean, I
One
think if
longer favor is better than one.
If we do it all in one day, I think realistically, it'll go out till 12:30 or so. Would you suggest?
And I'm not sure Steve actually can take a lot of time to do another additional tour to cover the second half if we don't do it all in one day. It's probably most efficient for his time to get through the
Would you
building.
please speak up? Because remember, we're trying to listen to you and you're competing with the AC.
Okay.
It's probably most efficient for Steve Romanelli to get us through all the buildings and not break up into 2 days that type of activity. He's the facilities director, so he has time, he has to do other things, so.
John's point about what the objective is, makes sense. And if the objective is to become somewhat familiar with the general space, then you don't need to do that detail.
Right. And I think what we're going to hear later, a whole host of different options for the spaces, which we're not going to know about when we're doing this. This is just a introduction to the structure, and kind of familiarity with the structure, and then so you have some more context when Michael and Joel talk about different kinds of options and reconfigurations. So, what I hear is people wanting let's do it in one time, and recognize that it's likely to go past 11:15, which is the end of the tour here. I think it's likely to go a little beyond that. Just even travel time between buildings, we didn't really build anything in for that. So I would realistically think more like 12:30 to finish this, to do it. And even that, we're going to have to keep moving along, I think. That sound okay? Yes. Okay, so we'll do that. Timo, we're going to still start with you at 7:30?
Yes.
And so everybody start there. If you want to carpool at some point, you can actually go there and then we could carpool from there. That would be fine. And then we'll have it all lined up from there.
I live right on the corner of Forest and Fayette Street, so most of you will probably be parking in front of my house anyways. That's not Fayette Street, so. Because anytime there's an event to the middle school, it's a regular park, so I assume that some of you will end up there.
So meet at the main entrance.
Yep.
So, I'm sorry, what day is this?
13th?
Walk over from Bubble Run.
13th. Week from today?
Yeah.
So I think one of the things I might propose, if I can interject, is you've seen the floor plans. So what I'll do is I'll make copies that are blank, just with the names of the rooms in them. And if you're doing half a day, I believe I can come with you. Because some of the things that I can point out, for example, Peter, you were saying that in some of the kindergarten classrooms, there are different stations. And a reason a teacher would do that, very simply, is, divide and conquer. Get some of the kids to do some of the reading, some play with blocks, some coloring, and that's why they designed it like that. That's intuitive to a kindergarten teacher. So simply, I might be able to point out some of the good, bad in different spaces, and then we can move on to a different space. Okay. So I think that would be helpful as well, just from my point of view. I know that we have varying experiences with education, but I'll just do it from my point of view.
Okay. And so on the floor plan, so Michael, make sure you work with Christy, because Christy's also working on some floor plans. So that when we're on the tour, we'll have floor plans.
Great.
Everybody will have a copy that they can look at as we're walking around. So we'll have those available at 7:30 on 13th. Okay?
Super.
Great. All right, turn it over to you guys. Or Liz, do you have anything else?
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay, so what you see in front of you, and folks, what you see in the back is what we're playing with in front. So I'm trying to be interactive with you as well. What we're doing today is a continuation from the working session that we had last week. And we're going to just start off with some of the points that we left off with, okay? So our agenda today is to look at some of these places real time on the map, talk about other possibilities. Again, it's a continuation of the conversations that we started, and I have that list. The other thing that we do want to nail down tonight, and Allison I think is also going to be very helpful with this, is that we want to have a good number that we're projecting to. And I know between NASDAQ and between ID, the company that we have the newest projections from, there are two different numbers on there. So what we really want to do is we want to go have a goal of a number. So we want to be able to have that in our minutes, and that's what we're going to be shooting for. As you well know, that any service that you're going to use, you're going to have a little different variation. We've been looking at some of the variations. I'm going to share the information with you as well, and I'll also give you some background. It also correlates with what we have on the map. So those are really the things that we want to talk about today, all right? So without further ado, what we've done is we've broken down Watertown into a couple of different sections. This is also going to be within our report. So now we're starting to get to the graphics. This is also going to be helpful when we talk to the community as well. So bear with me as I turn layers on and off. So if I start with regular Watertown, this is what we have so far. And this will also be good to actually put on the website because, as you will see in a second, it's pretty well highly detailed. So, one of the things that we saw, and this is just for our own interest, we did a quick calculation. You have more people in the ground in Watertown than you do above ground. I didn't realize that you had so many cemeteries, and we kind of went into some of the numbers, and it was just an interesting little tidbit. So, as you can see, we're getting pretty deep into the different things that we're looking at. So, I'm just going to turn on some of the school districts, and of course, the elementary we have up into the west. Lowell's in the middle, and Hosner is pretty much out. Now, this pretty much relates to the size of the schools you have. Now, I'm bringing this up because what's going to happen is as we're looking at renovations or additions, however we go, it's going to really look at these communities, the size relates to what we're doing. So, very simple, the size of a district is relating to the size of the school. We have that already. And that's also going to relate to how we do the renovations and additions. So that's just kind of simple groundwork. Because as we said before, we don't want to change our districts. These are, community schools. And I think that works well. The further we looked into it, even though that there is a big area here, it still works out rather nicely. And so that's number one. Number two, when we look at the land mass for additions and or renovations, it can work. And again, this is preliminary things and preliminary thinking. So we're going to be able to see that our next meeting. Again, this is gated data gathering. And now we're going to really, as you can see, we're really getting into the nooks and crannies and really going to be able to project. So, let me turn this off for a second. One of the things that I have conflicting information on is what is public fields and what isn't. And I think, Stephen, you might help with that a little bit. So hence, while you have the maps in front of you, we're going to break down into teams. And you're going to, I said that you're going to, I didn't bring crayons, but I said that you're going to start drawing and doing your own notation. All right, so as I progress, I'm going to give everyone a task, and we're going to start making our notes so I can, again, bring that in. And it's easier than just writing it down for me. So, again, looking at what is green and what isn't, that's one thing that we're going to overview. Next, you have some new residential components that are in different stages. So the demographic service did identify some of these spots, and we looked a little further into it. And for those in the back, let me highlight the color a little bit. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. So what we're seeing is in this area by close to the waterfront here. And I'm identifying one in this area, one in this area. So those are where the numbers are coming from for potential new residents that are coming in. Basically, it's pretty straightforward because you really don't have that much land that's open for development. And some of these are already being worked on at the moment. So that's number one. The second thing that we looked at, because we brought it up last time, So this reflects, these numbers reflect what's going on in those areas that are being developed. The question was, what about the one-family homes that actually can now be split into two-family homes? I wasn't sure of those numbers, so we looked further into it, and basically those numbers are small enough that we're adding at the very most, if the formula works right, 20 students at the most within our 5-year range. So it's negatable. Which will bring me back to this demographics in a second. Now, one piece of property I'm very curious about and couldn't find very much information on. See this farm here? So what is it?
It's a National Historic Landmark.
So it didn't show up as that on my map, so that's good to know. So
It's actually, because the address is actually, the house is in Waltham, the farm field.
that's okay.
You can see the house
Yep.
just over the line. The farm field is in Watertown. There actually is a house there. There was a, last time, was the child going to kind of school, the child was a caretaker. So
Okay.
there was, see, there's like a little, there's like a, down at the bottom, there's a little farm complex. But
Okay.
that cannot be used for housing.
Yeah, I didn't think so. That's why no one used it. It's kind of funny because Joel and I happen to be chatting at the moment, and we were going, why is there a farm all the way in the middle of Watertown?
So that's been,
So now we know.
continuous operations.
It was a
Okay.
governor's house or something.
It's a former governor.
So now I knew why I couldn't find it. All right, fair enough. Now, remember we talked about big blue sky ideas? We looked at the topography, and as you can see that no one's developing this area because it has a big rise in topography. If you want to spend a lot of money and make a really landmark school, that's your spot to do it, and that's the only spot you could
That's
do it.
Article 97.
Conservation land.
Then there you go, then that's the end of that one. All right, so we really have kind of exhausted all of the spots that we really could use. Now, if I need to be corrected, please tell me. So really, that's all the land that's here. All right, so we can put it off the list.
Can you zoom back to that
Sure.
other forest state?
On the corner? back
Yeah,
here.
where you were before. Like zoom, but then pan down, like looking
Oh,
over
okay, so you're
here.
looking at, yep.
Yeah, right there. So what's next to that lake there?
In this area?
Yeah.
That whole area right there,
No.
Okay.
If you pan back in a little, zoom in.
all that white area, that's where the Bell,
No, zoom out.
what's it called, Bellwater?
Right there, stop.
Yeah, it's
But-
development.
But right there where the sandy color is the development.
There are
Yeah.
now condos there.
So
But
you
what
can
about
see-
to the left? What is that?
This is all conservation area associated with Walker Pond. There is a piece down here that's not developed,
That where Steve's hand is
Has
right there,
AUL.
there's a parking lot there.
old parking lot from Raytheon. I'm sorry, AUL is an activity use limitation, so there's some contamination in there. It also doesn't have access. It's about,
7 acres.
yeah.
But that's not a feasible spot?
Well, the town doesn't own that.
Oh, because it's nice, it's right across from the Gore Estate, where they have a lot of,
Well, there's just
They call-
So
Yeah.
there's two problems with that. So the reason it was not included with that, where the Bell Estate housing development is because
Vincenzo.
there's an AUL on the land, so it cannot be used for housing because of the contamination on it. So when the developer bought that to build the apartment, they cut that out and did not acquire it. So it's a little orphan piece of land. The other thing is, it doesn't have any access to a public way, so there's actually no way to get to it unless you drive over somebody else's property. So it's an interesting
it's
leftover
infeasible,
piece.
but it's infeasible? Or
Well, at this point,
There's challenges.
there are those two
is it a
challenges.
challenging site, or is it infeasible?
Well,
That's what I want
It's
to
It's a
not owned
brownfield?
by the town of Watertown. It has an AUL that prohibits housing to be built on it, and it has no access to a public way. And the deed, and this is the other interesting thing, the deed of the housing development specifically states on the special permit they got, that there's no access no motor vehicle access from Waltham Street through down to that. So that was
You're not allowed.
not allowed.
For this project,
For that
there's a
project.
condition. The only other place you could get access to it is through the edge of Repton or this industrial property.
So that-
But you can't go around the lake? Or,
Because you could
Around the lake, this way?
yeah, yeah. There's no back way to go?
you can't get to Waltham Street.
Reserved open space.
Oh, like that
So the
parking
only
lot
way
right
to get
there,
to this-
you wouldn't be able to access by sharing an access route there?
On this
No,
end?
it's owned by LIG Development.
And because it's got limitations, they might be interested in selling it,
Yeah.
but it's got challenges.
Isn't that a cap site too? then?
It's not a cap site, but it does have an activity use limitation, which will be a big challenge for school. Now, it's not approved for residential housing. The school's even worse than residential housing.
Your kids could spend all day there.
So, I mean, basically it comes down to
Put more people in the ground.
if you're in a brownfield of any kind, you know, no matter what the limitation, do you want students there? So,
Well, with enough money, you could clean it up, but
yeah. But then it's been my experience that's a lot of money.
Yeah,
So,
all right.
but you know, again, it's great to look at all these things, making sure that we're doing our due diligence to exhaust all of these things. Some of the other things that we did look at that you're not seeing here, but we will look later at is, you know, the floodplain, the 50 and 100-year flood. The schools, as they are right now, are, you know, of course, high enough, but that also negates anything that is actually kind of really around this area. There is a quite significant floodplain in Watertown. The one last thing I wanted to talk about is active charter schools. Are there any in Watertown? No. Okay, I didn't know if I missed any.
no, but
which
there
is-
are two private.
private schools.
We have private schools.
Okay.
We have the Atrium School on Grove Street,
Okay, and
which is 1 through 8, I believe.
Yep.
We've got the Jewish Country Day School, which is actually down next to that area with the AOL we were looking at.
okay. So now is probably a good time to, you know, if you can, start marking it up, and let's go through our maps.
We have the St. Stephen's School, which is Coolidge Square, which is a very large
Benny, where's the Goddard School going?
Armenian Catholic school.
Goddard School
Okay.
is at St. Pat's. It's at St. Pat's. Oh, all right.
So the St.
There are some good heavy red markers that will do it.
What are we supposed to do? Just wait?
Just mark it up. Find those schools, mark them up.
We have lots of preschools.
We think it's
The preschools, and here's you know, we did talk to preschools, and we're going to come back to that in a second. Universal kindergarten. Are you doing universal K here?
because this is
Are you doing full-day K? You have? Okay. That's why it didn't show up special anywhere. It was already in it.
There's the Bergen School,
By the
too.
way, you
You know where Bergen is.
Yeah. Perkins, we know.
That's Mount Honor and Grove Street and
Storyville.
Okay, so
One is Arlington.
this is
This is the Mount Olive.
Stevens.
it's over here.
St. Stephen's right
Yeah, that's a great church.
I'm proud of us, we do Grove Street. They're marked up a couple more.
That's the Walker School.
One of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is because if it's a Catholic school or a religious school of any sort, if it's a private school, it's hard to find the numbers. If you go to their website, they normally don't publish it. And unfortunately, the schools, for students, yeah.
We don't know how many of them live in Watertown.
And that's the other thing. So,
Are you thinking like public-private partnership, or why are you
no,
thinking about private schools?
I'll tell you. Our demographics. In our demographics, they do not plot out any of the students that are going to any other type of school. So that, you never know what it's going to happen to our numbers there. Because what we haven't done as well is look into the ethnicity, if there's a certain ethnicity into Watertown that would go to a special religious school of any type, or if there's any other Montessori school that has a big following.
There are, but they're all communities.
But they're all over?
Surrounding. So
Yeah,
there's
I
a
could
big
probably get
Montessori
probably get the number
school
three
in
train.
Harlem, Lexington, I guess. A lot of kids go to the Catholic, the St. Pat's High School closed, they go to Newton,
And there's another Jewish school as well.
Arlington. So there's a lot of just,
It's like,
you know,
It's
just
spread over.
surround, because we're so
Here
small.
somewhere, but I
Yeah.
don't know
Town
which one
surrounding
it
us,
is.
there's a lot of other private schools.
Right, 'cause
A lot
this
of
is
our
where
kids
growth
go to
building
Buckingham
is.
Brown
No,
Nichols.
that's where CVS is now.
So
this
my
is
point
Arlington,
is,
this the-
you know,
Shady Hill School.
usually those
Right off the map, you know.
It's over the bridge.
Usually those
Here's the
schools,
tracks.
you know, a parent or a group of parents are going to carpool and they're going to take the kids there. And that's fine, you know, it's just another form of education, but our demographics don't usually reflect that. So I want to point out that, you know, keep in mind, that's another variable that happens with the demographics that we're going to look at. So I always want to point out that the demographics fluctuate that way. It's anytime you do demographics, nothing's set in stone, and it could go either way. But we want to have a contingency for that. So I just want to educate the staff, the committee, that that's my experience. But it's something to think about as well.
Do you need more information from those other schools to actually get a more accurate assessment?
And here's the thing, with that, we don't know if all of a sudden you're going to have an influx of kids leaving that school or going to that school. So even if we had the information.
Is it this one? Because that's the L.
With this kind of study, the master plan,
that one, yes.
it's tilting the scale to go either way. So the reason I'm bringing this up again is because I want to start having a set number between a NASDAQ, between
I know, but it's right behind the
ID,
Greek church.
The balance out. It's like,
It should be big.
it's ID. A solid number. So I'm trying to educate everyone with different variables, just so you know where I'm coming from. Yes.
So, a few of the variables that I feel like I don't know how to incorporate.
Sure.
I've seen articles over the past few years saying that Watertown is the place to be. It's definitely popular. You know, a lot of people don't want to live farther out anymore, and so they want to move into Watertown. So, you know, I saw one article that talked about a huge increase in population in Watertown. Then, you know, we have also the unaffordability of anywhere in Boston, right? So
Yes.
young people starting their careers, especially ones with student loan debt, how do they buy into a community that's closer?
You're right.
Well, on the other hand, Watertown's probably more affordable right now than Arlington, Belmont, Newton, Cambridge. And so maybe we are more attractive. It feels like those are kind of larger, big picture concerns than what we're looking at when we say, oh, we've got a bulge going through.
Right.
And I guess it feels like that's where nobody has a crystal ball, but we could use a consultant who can say more than, oh, the east coast of the US is doing generally this, because, you know, you get a lot of small fluctuations.
Yeah.
And it feels like Watertown is in a position to have one of those fluctuations.
It is, and let me tell you what we have looked at. And again, it's not our specialty, but in our due diligence, we wanted to look at it as well. We've looked at the median cost of housing to sell. Renting is something that is very hard to kind of put our fingers on, but you can look at indexes of, for the last 2 years, how the prices have gone up wonderfully. You know, property values are going up. Of course, the economy is doing a lot better. Construction is going up, so you do see the influxes. So the prices of homes have gone up, I think, by only 3%, but in a 2-year period, that's a lot. So that's one thing. How that reflects whether or not you're coming into Watertown, we can't tell. And that would be a consultant that you would have to purchase to see if that was viable. That's all I can basically that's the information we looked at so far. Steve?
I think there's a couple of things that factor in that. You know, I think a lot of people are very concerned about the number of projects going on, the development going on, and have attributed a lot of the capacity issues at the schools to that. And I would offer that the student enrollment numbers have not changed that significantly with the development going on, primarily because most of the developments 1 and 2 family or 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. And most of the people who are moving in are either, young professionals that don't have kids or empty nesters who don't have kids. And so I think those projects aren't really driving a significant increase in enrollment. I think two things probably are more significant in terms of driving enrollment. And one is that you've hit on, which is, Watertown is becoming a more attractive place for people to move to. So that's more reflected in turnover of existing housing stock. That empty nester moving into an apartment, they sell that house to a young family and they have kids.
Right.
So that certainly happens. But the other thing I think is important to consider is the programmatic impacts that are, I think, is what's causing more of the capacity issues that we have. We have relatively same number of students as we had in 2012, yet we have less capacity. And that's because we're, required or want to add programs, and we're, slice and dice up our space in so many different ways that you end up with a capacity issue. So I think that's driving the capacity concern much more than the development projects that have been going on.
And
It just feels like a big wild card that as the housing stock turns over from one generation to another, especially if it becomes popular with families with young children, and if we're building and renovating schools and people all of a sudden see the Watertown schools as being on a par with Belmont, then the family that might have moved into Belmont says, oh, wait a minute, I think I want to move into Watertown. So then it just feels like those are wild cards.
I think those are valid concerns, but I also don't think that's going to drive a dramatic change in the numbers that we're looking at projection-wise. The projections you have show maybe 100 or 200 students over a 10-year period. When you're talking about school system capacity, those aren't dramatic changes. That's, those are the adjustments you ought to have to be able to accommodate within buildings. If it were 600 or 700 or 1,000, then you're a whole new ballgame.
Steve, this is a really good point in terms of what you just said. If there's a fluctuation, we build for capacity number X that you're trying to get us to.
correct.
And if we have a fluctuation that goes the other way, where we lose 10%, it could go both directions. We have to build in capacity where it could go down or up. So you try to hit the sweet spot as best you can, but you've got to have room for to Chris's point, the growth 10% still sounds, if you're talking 200 kids, that's 10% still feels like a lot to me. And I think also the perception, we were talking about this before the meeting, that I think a lot of parents like myself are seeing space issues at a per class size and are feeling that crunch. But a lot of this coming from the programmatic side by bringing more special education kids into the district, which I think is a good thing. I think it's good for the district cost-wise, it sounds like, in terms of inclusive programming. But it sounds like, I know as a parent, I see a lot of development, and then you see class sizes feeling tighter. There's definitely, it feels like there's a connection, which I think would be a natural connection to make. I think making sure we know what's driving that, but building in the extra capacity.
And to take one step back to Pete's point, is that, again, if we look at 2016, 25-27, we look at 2025, 25-53, our highest point is in 4 years at 2020. And then we go back down within the 5 years. So you can see how it goes up and then how it goes down. So you've hit it on the point that right now you're full because of the programs, because you're now delivering the 21st century education. So that's what we're seeing, even at this early stage before we even start moving buildings around. But yes, you do have an influx. The numbers that we're looking at right now are at, in one point, ID's looking at 120 at your highest point. And Allison has a great chart that she looked at as well. NASDAQ had it as 220.
Over
At the
2
highest point?
years, I believe K to 12, it was adding about 240.
240. So that's a big number, but when you're looking at 2,500 kids, 2,700 kids at the, at your highest.
Still 10%.
That is a big number, but I guess my point would be, that's not a new school. 200 kids is
No.
not a new school. So what we're talking about is, we need to make sure our schools have a little bit of breathing room to accommodate a couple hundred kids.
Absolutely.
And I think
But we don't
plus
need a
the
new
flexible
school.
space you've been
Or at
talking
least a
about.
new
Exactly.
capacity.
And that's, so basically what's going to happen is that we're doing this master plan, but I'm going to give you examples of the flexible space, and then that goes into getting into a real true feasibility study. But I think you're all headed down the same road, that we see a lot of remodeling with some additions, and that's what we're headed down right now. I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is that, you see 100, 200, 220, whatever, pick a number. It's not half of that number is not going to land in one school, and you're not going to get 40 kids in one grade. And even still, we've got 3 elementary
Don't even
schools.
say it.
I know.
Don't say it.
It's a blue sky event, but the reality is it's going to be spread across the district.
Yeah, and that's the next thing that we're developing as well, is because if you have, let's say, 5th grade and the time period within a couple of years, you're going to see the peak for 5th grade, and then for 4th grade, you're going to see the different peak over here, so it all averages out to that number, that's the total. That's a graphic that we're going to develop, so it's easier to explain rather than just these numbers, which we understand, but we're also gearing up for the community meeting.
Can I just ask a question?
Please.
We were just talking about top line K to 12, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to figure out which of these forecasts you believe more, because they're very different in terms of where they're putting the growth in population, right? NASDAQ is showing it more in the K to 5, whereas Decision Insights has it more in the, I think it's high school, over the 10 years anyway, right? So, because that's a big deal, right? To figure out where you think it's going to be.
Yes.
I mean, if you're going to add 10% or whatever you think it is,
Right,
you're just
but-
going to add it to every school?
No, because here's when we get back to our map, and when we start looking at where the school district is for the different kids, that's going to give us an idea of what we need to do to the different elementary schools, just because of the mass of the kids. Also thinking about where new buildings can be coming from. Middle school and high school, that's one shot, that's easy. But when we're looking at the different areas in these kind of elementary districts, that's going to dictate the amount of additions and the amount of things that you have to do. So we'll be able to explain that more once we get a little bit further into really breaking it apart and showing you where the kids can go. And that's going to equate to the size of the additions or renovations.
Are we thinking about keeping, just hypothetical, you're not advocating for one way or the other?
Sure.
Are we thinking as a group here that we're going to keep the districts exactly where they are? I mean, I would think if we're, all things on the table, that,
Okay.
I mean, I just hypothetical here, that if we're thinking about capacity and where we're going to put kids, I'm not advocating that we do change it. I think it's just good to keep it on the table if we're thinking big picture.
And that's kind of funny, because when we were producing this map, we were looking at, why did you choose one thoroughfare rather than the other thoroughfare? And I don't know if anyone has the history here of knowing why the district has been like this.
No, I'm not sure, but I think my general reaction to that would be that I think you're right in that we may make some tweaks around that, but that's not the driver from my perspective.
No,
The
I just
driver,
said in terms of what we get, if we're thinking about
Right.
what spaces are going to go where.
Right.
I don't think you
But-
build a smaller space just because it's the Cunniff and it's a smaller school, or a larger space because it's the Hosmer, because it may be the Cunniff can take more space, or that the Lowell could take a larger addition than you could physically put and make
So-
the Hosmer too big, in other words,
Right.
regardless of what district
but,
it's.
I mean, I think our focus is more on the buildings. And so if we looked at the Cunniff and said, we can make this big expansion to the Cunniff,
Right.
then I think we would probably correspondingly change the district boundaries a little bit to accommodate that expansion.
Right, I'm just making sure
Yeah.
we're not taking a size consideration at a school off the table because of a district boundary. Because when
No.
we were talking about keeping things, okay, that's all, I'm just.
Yeah, because within how we're looking at it, it wouldn't be drastic changes, and I think before we ever really change anything, we look at the nuances as well.
Right, of course.
Because there could be a grandfathering of, well, my daughter went here and now my younger daughter wants to go here as well. There's a legacy. So that's politics within the school that we can easily adjust. So, and you're at a wonderful point that you have a school district of a great size that you can be that personal. So that's not off the table. Because you're right, there is some considerations of how much land you have and what can be done. So I think we're going to be thinking about that. That's going to be the next meeting. Because then we start looking at sizes and numbers and what we can do and real physical things.
But Andrea, you were saying Alice, I'm sorry. NESDEC's largest projection by grade is at the high school.
Decision Insight.
Decision Insight is at the high school.
Yeah, Decision
NESDEC is at
Insight
the
is
elementary
suggesting that
level?
we're going to, Decision Insight suggests that we're losing about 81 students over 10 years in K through 5. Whereas the NESDEC shows that we're gaining 123 over the same time period. So that's like a big difference in where they're putting the student.
So in order for us to start to develop the design options to remediate the issue, we're going to need to get an understanding of what is the design enrollment to shoot for. That's fairly fundamental in this process. And so what would be the process for you guys to reconcile the NESDEC report and the Decision and Design Insight report? There's a reconciliation, it seems, in order to provide us the right design enrollments to shoot.
Wasn't that part of what you guys are doing?
Yes, we can do that,
No,
but
just-
we also want
No,
to...
it's not. I mean, you're providing us the design enrollments based on your demographer, your consultants that you've hired to do your demographic studies. And there's two right now, right?
One is based on spring population and one is on the fall. So I think, and it's too late to wait for the fall, so I think that we didn't get enough on policy.
Yeah, and just let's
be-
grapple with that, to get us the right information. Or the information you feel most comfortable with to start doing the planning options.
And when you're shooting for a population number, you're shooting for a number, I'm gathering this correctly, you're shooting for a number this is what population we're anticipating based on what we know. And then to Steve's point, we're talking about having some extra capacity of whatever it is, whatever percentage, 10% or whatever. So if your number is 2,200 and you want another 220 kids on top of that, is that the number that you're looking for? Or are you looking for are you thinking about the extra capacity and?
Well, there's quite two ways to think about it. One is there's the design enrollment that you want to shoot for, based on elementary or high school at a certain fixed moment in time. With that, then there is the overlay of what makes sense by grade section. And so you might not want to have a 3.5 grade section in a school, but you might want to even that out, and which will provide some of that flexibility as you're planning out the footprint of each one of the schools. And there's multiple options within each school. That provides some level of flexibility within your future planning. Did everybody understand?
Would it make sense, I mean, I would think that one of the roles of this committee would be to agree what the target enrollment number is. Would it make sense we could look at the two studies, we could look at other things, but should the administration go back and try to come back at the next steering committee meeting with something we could look at and we could all vote to agree that these are the numbers we're going to use to try to reconcile you know,
Yeah, that's why I said we need
would
to
that
have
make
an
sense?
offline conversation.
And then the other thing is, you know, I want to go back to the point that Chris made about the attractiveness. You know, if you look historically, Watertown has lost population from 1970 at the high point, 40,000 people every year. So even we lost 1,000 people between 2000 and 2010. I mean, that's pretty substantial. I think finally we have turned a corner with what we're doing in town, and I would almost propose that a paradigm shift has occurred somewhere in the, you know, after 2010, where Watertown no longer has a reputation of being down on the heels and people are moving out because there's no opportunities here. There's been a lot of economic development. We've done a lot for the schools. So now maybe a lot of people who in the past would say, well, you know, I'm not going to send my kids to Watertown Public Schools. I'm going to send them to a Catholic school. Or I'm going to move to Belmont where the schools are better. I'm not going to move to Watertown. And many people, many of my children's classmates, especially my older son, that would happen. Kids would get to be in you know, at middle school age and they say, I'm not sending my kid to Watertown Middle School. And they literally moved 3 blocks away to Belmont because the schools were better. I believe we have turned the corner and people are now saying, wow, you know, the schools in Watertown are great. I think my child can get a good education. People are now wanting to move here, have their kids go to Watertown Public Schools. So do we need to factor in whatever the Decision Insight and NESDEC are showing us? Do we need to have a fudge factor of the attractiveness factor of an extra percentage of some sort to take that into account? Because if you look at our population numbers for 2015, they're actually higher now than they were in 2000. So I think people are moving back in, people are staying because it is attractive. And I think we would be, you know, looking at this, all things being equal, you know, but all things aren't equal, I don't think at this point. So I think we need to factor in some sort of fudge factor just in case.
Well, what I was going to say is that, is there, if from you guys' perspective, is there any harm, I guess other than the cost, what is the harm in overestimating a little bit? Or even, like, I mean, just from kind of piggybacking what you're saying is that, number one, 2-bedroom apartments with young professionals eventually produce children. And if Watertown's, it's not even necessarily people moving into Watertown for the schools or whatever, it's they make the choice to stay.
To stay, exactly.
It is the choice to stay. I work in one of the top performing public schools in the country, and I am planning on staying in Watertown. You know what I mean? Like, I'm choosing to stay and keep my kids, you know, in these schools. And so it's the choice to stay, which more people are making. But you know, it does seem like with all the things that, like, people who live here and send their kids to school here and know the schools and the population, it seems like we all are kind of a little wary of saying there will be no increase.
Go ahead. All right. Another thing to think about is we can't, even though we may redesign the interior of the school, the kind of education that we're doing might demand more space.
It does demand more space.
And so it's not with today's education. We need to build out space for education that we're imagining in 10 years.
And for the community.
Right.
It's a great way to bring the community into schools.
And also, when we talk about the enrollment from a few years ago, we had larger class sizes. And the committee has decided larger class sizes are not okay. That requires more space. I'm sorry, Kimo, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's it. And not just for general education too, but also for our ELL population, because I think they might need more space. Special ed population has been growing, so I think they might need more space. I mean, there's just a lot of other factors that you want to see as far as the education piece as well. So I think that needs to be part of that fudge factor that you were saying, Vinny. You know,
what I was going to say is, you know, I think we've spent a lot of time and a lot of resources trying to project the population. And at least from my perspective, I think we've come to the conclusion that it's not a huge change. You know, significant, but not huge. That point, I think, is probably more significant, and I don't need to cast aspersions, but I'm not sure we spent a lot of time or resources trying to project what those programmatic changes mean and how that's going to evolve, and, you know, what are the programs we want to add. You know, if
or even the programs that we want to serve, that we're not letting the space the kinds of space we get hamper our progress. But it would be better, like right now, our Fab Lab is a small space in high school. So we're taking, in the high school library, we're taking part of the library, middle school, to do the same. And as we embrace project-based learning and want to have more of those kinds of experiences, the way we have at the middle school with teaming, you need different kinds of spaces. But we're not letting that hamper our progress.
One of the things that
I'm sorry,
Jean
go ahead.
just provided us with was a list of the programs and classrooms for every school. And to the fact that, yes, you need more special education, and it needs to be done in different spaces. So when we're doing the master plan, at least, we know that there's a certain percentage that needs to raise to the whole school just for that. So we're taking into account that. So as educational planners, that's something that's our job to kind of give you numbers for. Again, the same thing for all the 21st century learning, that we know that you need a certain percentage more to be able to do some of these things. So those are things that we're doing as a master plan, adding that space as a total. So that's kind of in our package. Yes?
And I guess one other piece that doesn't have to mean building bigger now, but we've just looked at these maps and we've looked at our spaces and we've said, we're reaching the limit of what, we don't have any more open space, we don't have any place. So it feels like whatever decisions we make in these schools, we don't want to cut off our future either.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there was, I'm sure, a lot of wisdom in closing certain schools and in selling certain properties at that time. But, you know, if we put on an addition to some school that will hold a certain number of students, but also is put on in such a way that you can't make it any bigger after that. You know, 10 years from now when we're looking at the building, because we put on that addition in that way, we've stopped ourselves from putting on any more addition or getting any more space out of the school. It feels like that's got to be a big part of our thinking, because we know right now.
Exhausted every spot on the map.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at the high school alone, and I just brought this as one example. So one of the things that we're trying to understand, as I was explaining, is you don't really have any space on the high school to expand. So how do we do that? You know, do we take down a certain part of the wing and expand up? That's one option. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. The other things is, as we discussed, is looking at the interiors and seeing how you have, in some areas, double-loaded corridors, and where we can take out spaces and combine them and get rid of some of the hallway spaces. So even though that's part of a feasibility study, which would be the next thing, we kind of have to do a little forecasting on what is possible here. You know, at least some sampling to kind of calculate the sizes that are possible. Because the way that I'm looking at it at this point is that yes, you are going to have some kind of additions, but you're also going to have a lot of interior renovations as well. So it's harder than we first thought, because that's something that you really do during feasibility. But it has to be, part of it has to be really included in what we're doing right now. Some of the other, we did education. One other thing that we touched upon last week was some of the extra spaces. We talked about the library, some of the other buildings that I think you were going to give me some more information on. Just in thinking in the back of our minds, you know, can we do, again, thinking big story, can we do a kindergarten, pre-K kindergarten, and maybe first grade in some of these smaller spaces as even swing spaces while we do some of these renovations? You know, again, as I was describing, we don't want to break up cohorts, and we want to try and keep the strands all together, but we also have to look into some of these options. So who was going to try and supply me with some of that? Because I didn't write that down. Some of the swing spaces, we talked about the library, the firehouse.
Former police station.
Former police station.
Former police station.
Yeah.
Were you going to try and, yeah, I think you were going to try and give me some information.
Steve wasn't here last week.
I wasn't here last meeting,
I think you weren't here, so we put it on to you.
And obviously, I came very well prepared.
Okay. So let me
No, but I could probably off the top of my head answer, I mean, if you had a particular question.
What I think I'd like to do is I think you probably have some information within your office that I'm going to require anyway, so I'll email you later and find out the time, since we're so close that we can just get together and get some of this out.
Sure.
Which is really some side information, but important to have, again, a cohesive gathering of everything. So basically, we kind of went through everything that's in my agenda. I would like to put on a definite date of when we can have your final number for our student projections. So can we put a date to that at this point?
Next meeting?
So next meeting, will you have a number for us, or is that something we're going to debate?
Discuss and decide.
Allison has a great spreadsheet.
She
So
does.
I already emailed Lon, and we'll talk to decisions at hand.
Okay.
And we'll mess that both.
All right.
And then also with,
Yeah, no. So if you have this information even before the next meeting, because the next meeting is not next week but the week after,
July 19th.
it would be fantastic if you could inform me, because that is pivotal what we're looking at. So that would be great.
I think we have to make a decision at the next meeting. It's too late.
Yes.
I mean, we need to, I don't mean to pressure, but I think.
no, I agree. And that's why I think we have to go back to both sources and say,
Yes.
you know, what's the start?
Maybe
And how
Allison
you-
could email the sheet that she's got out to the group. I know it was, a lot, I mean, even just as in summary form, it's a lot of numbers to digest, and she's done a good job of putting it in a concise form.
I met with Lauren yesterday, and she was fantastic about supplying me with even deeper insight on what DI did. So between the two, hopefully that's a good, strong backer for all your data. So are there any last topics that we want to talk about before we open it up to the community?
Sure, and I
Just
also
a
have,
quick question about,
there's a population study done by.
open floor plans, all that sort of thing. Question of safety has popped up a couple of times in various conversations.
Yep.
Various scenarios, lockdowns, shelter in place, all that fun stuff.
Yep.
Your designs obviously must have to take that sort of thing into account.
We do, and there's so many different things that when we get into the feasibility study, we review, because as I had a conversation with Gene, there are really almost two different ways of looking at security nowadays within, let's say, an elementary school. One is closed plan, one's open plan. One has all the windows where you see things going on, but then there are different vestibules where things are closed off and you cannot proceed any further.
Yeah.
That, again, is to say, trying not to get the teachers and custodians to put brooms and things in the door to keep them open because they're getting something from the car. So, there's all these different things, from that to bulletproof whiteboards to where you could hide kids in certain areas that are cabinetry, and there's a whole slew, and it's a whole different, wonderful interior design discussion. But again, that's our kind of our next task.
Right. Thanks.
No, please. Allison.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
I know you talked, next step is something called a feasibility study. I know we've all talked about it, and I still get confused, and I know it's more detailed. So at the end of this process, what are we gonna have? I know it's gonna be a couple different options on something, like what is that, what is it? Do you know what I'm asking, or am I being too confused? Because I'm
What do you
confused.
mean by this process?
This master planning process, this SMMA is helping us with. It's not gonna be a feasibility study, right? It's gonna be a,
Master plan.
okay, and what does that
It'll
mean?
be a summation of the analysis and research that we've done today, overlaid with options for development, whether they're renovations, additions, or new construction. They're not detailed floor plans, but they're more of a massing and relationship-based floor plan with cost estimates overlaid on top of those. The next step that Michael is referring to is a feasibility study where you'll take those specific buildings and develop detailed floor plans in a much more defined way. So as a master plan, you're looking holistically at a long-term vision, and in a feasibility study, you're taking the individual buildings and developing the planning modules in a much more detailed way.
But it also includes phasing, correct? The master plan we're talking about.
We'll have a master plan sequence.
I'll get it eventually. Layperson is on our detective.
Michael, would you repeat Allison's questions, because I know she's sick, so.
I just asked the difference between what we're doing and feasibility study, what's in the master plan. That's what
Okay,
he's
thank you,
answering.
Allison.
Yeah. And one last question, not about that though, something simple. Go ahead.
I just want to add to that. So I think that document that you're talking about, that Joel's talking about, will come out at roughly the end of August. That's the timeline, correct? And so I think at that point, we're into the school year, into September, that document becomes kind of our knowledge base, and I mean broadly for the community and for the school committee to look at that document. And there'll be some suggested options and sequencing and all the rest. But I think there'll be more opportunities for discussion of that, because that's not deciding what the next step is going to be. It's presenting options of what that next step is going to be. But I think then we have continued conversations in September into October about what those options look like and how we want to move those forward. So I think there's still a lot more discussion, more opportunities for community engagement and discussion at the school committee level.
And we also have that statement of interest.
Well, and then the statement of interest for the high school, we might hear about that in December or January. So that kind of comes in out of left field a little bit, to be honest. We have to deal with it when it comes in.
That's when you do a feasibility study, once you know, because I doubt very much that the town would fund something without MSBA. Right. Maybe you would.
Well,
I shouldn't say that. That would be great.
Well, I think it depends. Well, certainly the size of the size of the high school.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But what I think what we're going to have are options here that are going to be different scaled sizes of kinds of ways to move forward.
Right.
Some of which are more affordable, I think, for the town to do on its own, or whether it takes debt exclusion, whatever. But I think there'll be a range of options for us to consider on the price side.
But at least, even with the window project, we get reimbursement from the town.
Right.
And from the state to help the town with it. So it would seem as though we would want to be able to partner with MSBA. It's 48% back, whatever we do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And again, remember that the MSBA, the SOI, is not a guarantee for the high school. That was just our primary focus because that was the school deemed most in need. They may come in and say, you've got other problems elsewhere and we think it should be fixed here. So that's a bit of a curveball, but again, we'll know by the end of the year.
Right.
But it shouldn't, it's a master plan, it's not written in stone.
Right.
If we get a curveball and somebody wants to give us a big check, we'll figure it out.
We'll take it.
Yes.
I have another question that I had asked last time, and I think you said at this point, going forward, can we have, not necessarily a detailed agenda, but a list of what we plan to discuss at each of the upcoming steering committee meetings and community forum, the topics?
Yes, from this point on, it's going to be a lot more detailed because this is really the end of our data gathering, except for the final number of students. So yes, that's going to be spelled out.
When can we get that?
I would say the middle of next week.
Okay. And are we eventually at some point going to hear what the educational leadership team's feedback was and what they'd like to see?
Yes, because we have compiled that. So I think the next big meeting we have is actually the community meeting. So what I'd like to do is email that out to everyone on the committee beforehand and then present it, because it's raw data and it's open. So I'll send that out before we show it to the community.
Along the same lines with other ideas, is there a point where you're going to start throwing ideas of, okay, here's one option, blow out this wing, go up, here's a quick sketch up drawing, or here's, even if it's just a bullet point list of here's the big picture ideas. Is there a point where you're going to throw, here's all the ideas we've come up with so far, what are we missing, or having us to chew on those ideas and think about things before we come into a meeting?
See, this is why I look to Joel every once in a while, because he lays me back. Simply because, if I had my time and budget, and no budget, I'd be detailing a lot of it, but I'm going to give you some samples.
Okay.
Some ideas, and rather than doing samples that are just out of the blue, I'm going to be taking, what you have in your schools to kind of give you an idea. But then, yes, with the master plan, we'll be able to talk through at least, the ideas and how we came up with that idea. So if anything else, I'll open it up to the community. So if the community has any other comments, now's the time. Yes, sir.
So I just four comments I want to make. So you talked earlier about the mix of private versus public. Those numbers are in either the Decision Insight or the NESTEC study. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's about 5% that has changed. The mix has changed by 5% in recent times, meaning that there's 5% more of the children's pool locally that is in public school today than years back. So that's that trend. The other comment is something that was alluded to, which is Watertown, in terms of the percent of households, Watertown has about 14,000 households. Of those, Watertown is about a quarter. Watertown is in the bottom quarter in terms of percent of households with kids in schools other in the state. What that means is that in all likelihood we're going up and not down. Right? We're all trying to go to the middle kind of thing, right? Yeah. The other comment that Vinny alluded to is success, if you may, right? So if you look around at the percent of kids in public schools around the towns, we are the least of all the neighboring towns. Look Waltham, look Newton, right? So again, more information, and you can go to the extreme, like Belmont is I think like 45% or something like that kid, and 1% is 140 households. So it can sway the numbers pretty quickly, right? So something to keep in mind, and ultimately, among the committee, do the eye test, right? I mean, you've talked to your friends, talked to your neighbors, you've looked at your street. What are your eyes telling you, right? And the other one is something that Steve alluded to in the sense, or Pete alluded as well, in terms of shared community space, right? I think it meets two objectives. One is, while it works shared, I think it provides for a nice space for the community. The other one is, given what was said, I hope that we're not going to build a school of projection +3, right? Because, obviously we'll pay that gives no flexibility in programming, no flexibility in enrollment. Like, of course, money is limited, right? But it's much harder to add classrooms, after the project has gone through than at this time. I mean, yes, it costs money, but it costs a hell of a lot less, and it produces a lot less wrinkle effects now than it will 10 years down the road or so. So I certainly hope that there's some flexible space built in there, that if we need it 2 years from now, great, we have it, and if we don't, it's going to be this great, wonderful community space that is awesome, right? Right. So.
Your name, I'm sorry?
My name is Diego.
Diego? Great comments, thank you, Diego. One thing, that we have had conversations about is community spaces and shared spaces. So there are some ideas that if we do renovations, that let's say we do a gym or an auditorium renovation, we design it in such a way that those spaces can be even rented out for a theater company or for a soccer camp that comes in and uses the gymnasium and soccer fields during that time. So we have really looked into that, and it is great observations. Thank you. Any other comments that we'd like to hear? John, you want to close us out?
I think so. Already, I want to thank everybody for coming. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Lisa.
I was kibitzing and I didn't hear you call for any questions. My apologies. My name is Gary Shaw. I just had a quick one for you. On the options, when you were describing the deliverable at the end of the process, towards the end of, I guess it's August, right? So you're talking about options and then you shifted to the word sample. Can you explain what that is? And the second part of the question, just so I don't have to talk again and delay you, is how will you go about establishing the criteria for evaluating the options? That's as important as anything else that I've heard you talk about tonight. To come up with options with absent criteria to evaluate them kind of doesn't leave a direction forward. So if you could touch on those two things, that'd be great.
Sure, Gary, I think you really touched on it yourself. The criteria is basically all the data that we've been talking about. And when you think about, first off, just getting that data is going to be the basis of what's going to be in a master plan. Now, a lot of that data is like a tree. You have the trunk and then it branches off into leaves and does everything else like that. So the data can go out there and it can branch off in many different ways. We need to bring it back and qualify and quantify it. So that's part of our job, is also try explain why we came up with that. So let's say we do have a solution, and the solution is basically based off of this data. So it's hard to just explain it. It's a lot easier to draw it out when we get to that point.
Yeah, the question is really how you could simply say, yes, we're going to have a defined, clear, articulate list that will guide us in evaluating one option versus another. That can answer the question as far as I'm concerned. How you get there is something your process will evolve. I just want to make sure that there's going to be some criteria that relate to subjective and gut-related issues from the town and the community's perspective, not just pure data, because that won't necessarily address a lot of the important things that you'll probably hear.
You're right. It is data-based, but then you go and take everyone's opinions, thoughts, designs, concepts, everything from the leadership team of the educators and what they're looking for to the town and what they expect and what we can afford. So
there'll be a list.
Yes. I'll just say yes.
Right.
Now the difference between an option and a sample.
So if I am giving just options, for example, if I'm looking at the actual high school and if I'm taking a wing of it, so I know that I have structure in these certain areas, so I know I can get rid of these walls. So let's say I'm going to get rid of this walls and make that into a common area that can now open up into a science room, and maybe the science room has walls that are partitions to it, so now you have math here and science here. I'll be drawing these out as a sample of what 21st century education looks like and what we want to try and deliver, and using your physical base for, if I'm doing a remodel, what this would look like. That is the kind of sample I'll be giving you.
So you're saying there are two things. There'll be options into what happens at Cunniff, what happens at Hosmer, all of those things.
So when I say
those are options, this is a sample about a higher level of detail.
And it's almost a peek into what we do for the feasibility study. But we do this to kind of explain, not just say we want to remodel, but this is the way that we want to remodel. It might not be that way, but it's glancing into possibilities.
Michael, you're not going to be examining each school. You're basically kind of doing one kind of idea of an area of a school.
So just maybe this one wing that shows an example of how you open up into common areas, how you can get rid of some of your hallways and make that into teachable space and still address the egress needs and such. rather than us just saying, well, we're going to redo the interiors, we don't really know what that means. Does that mean new paint and new technology? Part of that, yes, but part of it also is this direction that we want to take. So that's what I mean by sampling. Yes?
I have a question, I guess for everyone, because I've heard a couple things about as time has changed, it's not necessarily that we have more students, but that the mandates of today's education, students on IEPs, different programming has changed. So is it being taken into account the mass, there's a huge amount of students who are placed out of districts because could be their needs, could be due to the school district's abilities, but at the end of the day, the goal would always be for every child to be educated in their community. Are those numbers being looked at during the study and being considered when the options in these buildings are being placed?
Yes, one of the things that we have talked about are children that are on the spectrum, children that have an IEP. Some of these children are being sent out to other facilities, and our goal would be to keep them in the own neighborhoods to be able to get them out of their IEP, be able to do inclusive classrooms so they can have the special needs addressed, but also gets them to the point where they're now being in an inclusive class so they can actually get out of the IEP to be able to go and be as special as they can and keep them in the district.
So I'm just going to give you one little correction. An IEP is an individualized education plan. So they're going to have that no matter what.
Correct.
That's part of their makeup.
So mainly the children that are on the spectrum.
Right, but what about the rest of the kids that are being placed out? I think Watertown has overall really done an excellent job attempting to keep kids with the spectrum in, but are we looking at other children with disabilities being able to be part of the school demographic in Watertown in the future? Or are you just looking at children who are being placed out on the spectrum?
No, as a whole, we want to do universal education. So that means any child that has, and again, as it sounds like you know, there are different needs that can be addressed within a school, or does it need to be one-on-one or five-on-one education for that special need child. So in those instances, that's a different demographic, and I think that's something that we would study a lot further in the feasibility study. And that really requires a little bit more in-depth conversation.
And if could I add something?
Please.
So we have 5 different specialized programs. We do have families that move here specifically because of like for example, Perkins School is located in Watertown, so we have families that move here specifically for Perkins School. We're not going to be able to duplicate a Perkins School. That's so number one. And then we have students that move here to go to other, this particular area has really fantastic, very specialized programs like Perkins. So, and to go back to something that someone, I forget who said it here earlier, about the financial benefit of keeping students in district, to me, it's much more than that. Right. The students, so if you have a student that, whether on the spectrum or whatever their individual learning need is, for example, we have some students that they're going to learn how to, in their life skills program, learn how to go to a CVS or go to the Dunkin' Donuts. They should be doing that here because they're going to live here. And so we do have that kind of programming. Again, we're not letting the kinds of spaces we have limit the programming we have. But we're going to do what we feel is the best thing for students. Some students, their needs are better met by having an out-of-district placement, and then for most students, we can service their needs here. Right. No, so we're never going to not have students that are outplaced, because sometimes that is the right decision. Right. So we look at the decision on a case-by-case basis.
Right, and I completely agree with that. I just want to make sure that the steering committee is giving the school district the opportunity to really look at that piece, because it is definitely case-by-case. Right. But it is nice to know that there are children, it was just being said, I heard a few times, that since the demographics changed, since the mandates have changed, that these are pieces that have to be looked at because it does affect how you can place children in each room and how many you can place. So I wanted to make sure that is being put into consideration.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. 7:30.